So welcome everyone to this is our first meeting in person, semi-hybrid. The topics of today's conversation is rethinking Argentina's strategic sectors economic growth. And we're going to be talking about biotechnology and renewable energy. This is the presentation of the Argentine Studies Visiting Fellowship funded by Fundar. And we have the pleasure of having with us Juliana, who will present first. Juliana Gonzalez holds a PhD in the social sciences at Flacso and a master in international relations, also from Flacso and San Andres in Buenos Aires. And she leads the chair in China International Studies at Flacso. Her research focuses on economic, financial relations between China and Latin America. I think somebody is trying to enter, with an emphasis on Argentina. And she's going to be talking about Chinese investment and finance in Argentina renewables, implications for energy transition and development. And afterwards, we will have Juan, who holds a PhD in political science from the Universidad Torquato Di Tella and an MA in governance and development from the Institute of Development Studies at the University of Sussex. And he is the coordinator of the program on natural resources, innovation and environment, and the Argentine think tank Fundar. And his research focuses on business, politics, productive development of natural resource-based industries in Argentina. Okay, thank you to both of you, and let's start with Juliana.
Thank you, Ilas, for receiving us. Thank you also to Fundar for financing this amazing fellowship. I'm really honored to be here today. As Victoria just told, I'm going to talk about China's investment and finance in Argentina's renewables and the implications for energy transition and economic development of the country. But first of all,
maybe if you use the cursor.
No.
Usas el cursor, por ahí te funciona. Yo di una clase acá y tuve que usar el cursor.
Una tecla.
So, first of all, what I wanted to say is.
No funciona con la tecla.
Funciona
¿Ya lo probaron, Pilar?
Sí, ayer. Yes, we just did it yesterday.
¿La ves? Con el cursor.
So, first of all, what I wanted to say is that China has been pursuing like a national modernization strategy that is through globalization, and it's merging like both domestic and also foreign policy. What does this mean? That China started to launch the Going Global strategy in 2001, and then it merged with the Belt and Road Initiative. And what is this about is like China looking beyond its shores to secure resources and also markets and technologies. This is happening through mainly through the support of the policy banks in China to especially to state-owned companies, but also to private companies from China abroad. And then Latin America, as it's a really rich territory in terms of food and minerals, but also energy resources is like, it started to be like a huge territory where China started to look at, especially at the beginning of the 21st century. So to some extent, China supports, Latin America supports China growth and development, and this started to happen mainly through trade, but then it started to be complemented by investment and also financing. And this is important. What I say there is that investing in but also manufacturing and deploying the resources of renewable energy is part of this outward that China is pursuing like more recently. We could say like maybe in the last 8 or 5 years, renewable energy started to be like a huge outward in this framework of national modernization. So when we talk about this domestic approach and also global approach from China in terms of climate change, targets established are mainly established by the central government through the 5-year plans. I'm going to go like to the main targets that China has established during the 21st century. But what China is seeking is like to try to become a low carbon society, and also it introduced the concept of ecological civilization, that is resources, the complementary between nature and human being. So in this framework, technology is really central. It's part of the policy or the domestic policy, but also the global approach of China to become a leader in terms of technology, and this is applied to climate change also. I'm not going to go in detail to every of each 5-year plan, but what I want to say is that China started to address climate change issues since the 10th 5-year plan. It's okay. So, but targets until the Paris Agreement, targets were not compulsory. So China has established like many targets in the frame of its 5-year plans, but for example, in the 11th, reduction in energy consumption, and also starting to reaching trying to reach the 20% by 2010, and then the 12th 5 plan was really central in terms of national. China started to establish like a strategy for climate adaptation. This plan was also central because in terms of history, it was like the first announcement between China and the US in terms of what they were going to commit towards the Paris Agreement. And if we take a look at what has recently happened, for example, the announcement yesterday was that China and the US, after this announcement in 2014, the announcement that they did yesterday was like the first one in 9 years. So during the Trump period, for example, China and the United States started to look to climate change like differently. We can talk about that during the discussion, but then what we can say about this new the 5-year plan that ended like last year, for example, is that China kept on trying to commit itself in terms of domestic, but also in terms of its global approach to climate change. What is new in the new or the recently launched 4th-year plan is that China has announced to reach a peak of emissions to before 2030, and also to reach carbon neutrality by 2016. How is it going to happen, or what is the new plan or the new 5-year plan going to reach these targets? For example, to reduce the energy intensity by 13%. Also, to reduce the carbon intensity by 18%, and also to reach 20% of in terms of non-fossil fuels in primary energy by 2025. So again, technology innovation is central, and China is going to, or is committing to expand its hydro, nuclear and natural gas, but also its wind and solar capacity domestically, but also it's really interested in investing and financing this kind of energy abroad. And then it comes, we can understand like this framework in terms of domestic and policy and global approach from China, and say that loans from China are provided to encourage projects that align with China's climate policy. So to help, but these laws are also intended to help Chinese enterprises to export the energy products that they produce, and also the services that they produce. The Made in China industrial policy is central because it's the one that is tended to make China a leader in technology toward 2049. So companies are investing in alternative energy, but also in renewable energy globally. And Latin America is central in this framework because Argentina and Brazil are like the main recipients in terms of renewable energy and also alternative energies. I'm not going to go to the numbers in terms of, we can discuss this later, but these are like the numbers in terms of trade and FTA and also loans in Latin America. China has become a really important trade partner, but also a financer and also an investor. We can discuss this during the part of discussion, but I wanted to tell you a broad image of China's role in Argentina's political economy and energy. Chinese companies started to be present in the oil and gas sector since 2010 through two really large companies that are the China Offshore Oil Company and also Sinopec. But also recently we have some memorandums of understanding in China trying to build, for example, a really important gas duct that would connect the south part of Argentina and end it in the south part of Brazil. Also, China is investing and proposing loans for extending railways that, among other resources, are vital to transport oil, for example. Then we have two very important cases in terms of China. We have signed an agreement to build our fourth nuclear plant in Argentina with China that is going to finance it to be financed by the Industrial and Commercial Bank of China. And also we have an ongoing project that is two big dams in the south part of Argentina that are also being financed by 3 banks of China. The 3 of them are commercial banks. Also, we have presence in the lithium sector. So we have Kangfeng in the Caucharí-Olaroz project, that is a lithium extraction project in the north part of Argentina. This company is also present in another project that is the Mariana project. We can talk about this later also. Hana Group is also present in terms of exploration, but also extraction of lithium. Lithium is really important in South America. Argentina takes part of is part of the triangle of lithium jointly with Bolivia and Chile, sorry. So it's really important to see these companies playing their part in the lithium sector. We have also memorandums of understanding in terms of Chinese companies going to produce urban electric vehicles in Argentina through lithium production. But what I wanted now to focus is on the wind. On the wind and solar wind sectors. I've just told you about the policies that China has in terms of climate change, but I wanted to show you that Argentina has been pushing for renewable sectors since the end of the late 90s and the beginning at the beginning of the new century. So our first law in terms of renewable power was this one, the law 25019, and this was the first law to start to push for a generation of electricity through solar and wind sector, through solar and wind capacity. Then in 2006, we have another law that started to push more for the presence of renewables in the country. But the most important that we can say is that the law that comes after the Paris Agreement, or in the framework of the Paris Agreement, That is the generation from renewables to reach 20% of total consumption of energy by 2025. And this is really important because this law opens the door for not only for the Paris Agreement commitments, but also in terms of the open call for auctions. We have a plan that started to call for auctions for renewable power, and then this is the moment when China starts to be really important in terms of both solar and wind sectors. They have participated in 2 auctions, that is Renewable 1 and Renewable 1.5. And both Envision Energy and Sino Hydro were awarded with contracts. Those contracts that Envision was awarded with, all of the parks were inaugurated. And also in terms of solar power sector, we have a huge presence in terms of investments, but mainly in terms of financing solar, the biggest solar park in South America. What is important in terms of Argentina is that we don't, our agreements are not only in frame of national or state-to-state relations, but local relations. We have governors and local authorities and also entrepreneurs really influential, and we have 3 cases in provinces like Jujuy, Salta, and Chubut, pushing for renewable on their own. And what as a conclusion and final thoughts and maybe recommendations, of course, in terms of relations with China and overall public policy in terms of for Argentina. Argentina and China have a multi-level engagement. As I said, they have national, provincial, and local engagements in terms of renewable power. China's interest is expansion, merges this expansion to finance and invest in renewables globally, merges with Argentina pull to receive investment and finance in renewable energy. But we have some things to consider in terms of future relations. One of these is that Argentina should start to push for the technology transfer in these projects. Most of these projects are turnkey modality. So this is a really challenge that we have to face and we'll have to discuss. And this is what I recommend is that the approach is transversal in terms of both technical and also institutional. When I say institutional, is that ministries in Argentina, the Ministry of Economy, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, also the Ministry of Production, but mainly the Ministry of the Science and Technology, and also chambers of these sectors have to make a dialogue and try to build a roadmap toward the relations broadly in terms of the energy plan, but mainly in the relations with China. And of course, this has to be promoting the integration of local capacity and local industry, and of course try to push for more investment and finance from China, but considering this issue that is central for energy transition in particularly, but mainly for Argentina's economic development. Thank you very much.
And then I'll make some brief comments to both of you, and we'll start the conversation with everyone. I'm gonna tell you at 10 and at 15, Juan. Okay?
Okay. Okay, thank you very much,
Vicky and all the amazing team here at ILAS for organizing this event. I will talk about agricultural biotechnology in Argentina and its potential, and specifically about a proposal of how to fulfill that potential. This proposal is to create a public-private agri-biotechnology fund in order to finance a national strategy for the promotion of biotechnology. So, first question, why should Argentina do this? So why should Argentina promote and focus in the promotion of agricultural biotechnology? First, because Argentina has certain advantages in terms of the large agricultural base. Argentina is a major agricultural exporter. Almost 65% of its exports come from agriculture and processed agricultural products. So there is an important market in Argentina that can work as a base to innovate and generate local innovative firms that provide to that agricultural sector. And if we see the numbers, GMCs, so the main product of biotechnology, GMCs are a large market in Argentina, as well as globally. If we look at the expansion of seeds in terms of agriculture globally, it's a very expanded product in many countries. So there is an opportunity there to have access to that markets and move from primary-based exports to exports of knowledge-intensive activities. Like we know that seeds are very knowledge-intensive and science-based products now. So those are the advantages. On the other hand, we have also two important objectives that Argentina could follow with agricultural biotechnology. The first one is productive diversification. Argentina could use, as I said before, agriculture as a platform in order to innovate, and recent science and technology developments allow this increasingly. We can talk later about gene editing and the potential it has to keep on moving the frontier about innovation in natural resource-based activities. That from one side, move from primary profile in the productive structure to a more diversified and knowledge-intensive economy. And on the other hand, agricultural biotechnology also brings promises to achieve more competitive agriculture and more sustainable agriculture. Of course, these two objectives depend on how the technology is regulated. It's not only what technologies, but what regulations we use for that technologies. And particularly a premise of this presentation is that it matters not only the technology and the impact that technology can have, but also who develops the technology. The issue is which actor, if it's in the private sector or the public sector, if it's local firms or multinational firms, has an impact on achieving this potential. And just to mention, Nature wrote an editorial, published an editorial article recently saying how agricultural biotechnology and specifically gene editing can contribute to fulfill important challenges as climate change, to deal with challenges like climate change and food security. So there is many reasons why Argentina do this. Now, if we look at what is the progress in terms of realizing this potential, well, not very much, and there are many challenges. If we look at the sector, is mostly dominated by multinational companies, and local companies struggle to compete with these multinational companies in agricultural biotechnology. Just to say one indicator that shows this, out of 62 products that were approved in Argentina, only 3 were developed and are property of Argentine companies. So this shows how concentrated it is in multinational companies. And this is important also because Argentina still depends, because of this, on the adoption of technologies developed by multinational companies that usually they develop these technologies not thinking about local problems or local challenges or social issues, but more to follow their global business strategies. So that is what I was saying before. It is important to think and ask a question of who will lead the development of agricultural biotechnology. In a recent study, we are going to publish now that we are doing with our research team at Fundar, we studied what are the determinants of this result, and we find that there are multiple and systemic causes. I will focus here in two of them. That is the crucial role that the state and public R&D has in developing this activity. And the second one is the intellectual property regime. So we identified those important causes. Here, the fund I am proposing today tries to deal with these problems identified. One more comment of how far are we from that potential is to mention this important exception, that is Biotechnology Crop Solutions is a national firm that, among other factors that explain the success of this firm, that is competing globally and is listed in NASDAQ and is worth $7 million and has very valuable technologies and is attracting a lot of investment. So this firm achieved this thanks to important public investments in R&D and a very virtuous process of public-private articulation, so between the company and researchers at public research institutions. So the main technologies, particularly HB4 technology, that is a technology that gives soy and wheat tolerance to water stress. So this is a very valuable technology in the context of climate change, and it's one of the reasons it is attracting so much interest. So this was developed by more than 50 years of public-private collaboration. So I wanted to stress the important role that investment by public institutions had in the few cases that managed to compete with multinationals. So a crucial aspect of this diagnosis and proposal is how the intellectual property regime affects the appropriation of innovation rents between different actors. So I sketched simply which are these actors in the agriculture biotechnology value chain, and we have the companies that develop gene traits, the companies that develop seed varieties, and the agricultural producers. So companies that develop gene traits, we can think the most popular, just to give an example, is the Monsanto RR gene resistant to glyphosate. It was a very determinant technology in Argentina and agriculture. So basically Monsanto, what it does, it gives under a contract license to a seed company that gene, and the company inserts it to different seed varieties. So in this chain, what we are studying is how the innovation rents are distributed among these actors. And what we see basically is that innovation rents are mostly appropriated either by multinational companies that control this most profitable segment of patentable gene traits, or to agricultural producers. And national seed companies that are mostly in this chain are struggling to have the resources in order to invest in all the costs that developing biotechnology has. That is much more than R&D, it's regulatory costs, legal costs, commercial costs. So I will sketch briefly why this is the case and how the intellectual property regime affects this. In terms of the distribution with agricultural producers, what we see is basically that there is a large illegal seed market that is much larger in Argentina than in neighboring countries like Brazil. In Argentina, we have only 36% and 44% of soy and wheat of certified seed. The numbers in Brazil exceed 70%. So there is an important aspect of this distribution that is because of the existence of illegal markets. Another important is a distortion of the application of the law of seeds that basically allow large agricultural producers to reutilize seeds without paying royalties to the seed companies. We can go in more details in the Q&A, but I want to move to also talk about how is this distribution affected. And basically what we see here is that while gene traits are covered by the very strict patent law in Argentina, seed varieties are covered by the more flexible seed law. So this creates an imbalance between these two segments. And this regulatory aspect tilts the balance in favor of the bargaining power of multinational companies in this segment. Plus, seed companies depend in the contract licenses they firm with the multinational companies. So One other important aspect of this is that multinational companies invest in Argentina only a marginal fraction of their global R&D investment. If we take the total R&D investment of the private R&D investment, only 1% is invested in Argentina. So it's only $58 million out of $5,000 million. So this probably should not be a surprise. We know that multinational companies prefer to keep their R&D activities in their home countries. But we have to know that we cannot expect that R&D investments to promote biotechnology will come from multinational companies. Another important aspect is that this is concentrated basically the largest 4 companies. So I will skip this, but there is an important debate about what is the role and impact of the public investment in R&D. We can talk about this in the Q&A section. So I'll just mention in these last 5 minutes how is this public-private agricultural biotechnology fund work. So what the diagnosis behind this is how I showed before, that it is necessary to increase private and public R&D and to rethink how innovation runs are distributed in the value chain I showed before. And what we argue is that it's necessary to increase local R&D investments and to strengthen local technological capabilities and finance a strategy that has to be coordinated between different ministries involved in agricultural biotechnology and private actors. So what we suggest is that it's necessary to redistribute the innovation rents from agricultural producers and multinational companies towards seed companies. This proposal is based in previous proposals presented in Argentina, but that were never approved. Proposals from INASE and INTA and other researchers studying these issues. We can talk also later about the political economic challenges of implementing and approving, getting the political support for this proposal. So the fund will be financed, basically, I will show how it will be financed and how it should be distributed. The financing of the fund will come from a payment of a technological fee that agricultural producers will do the moment they sell the harvest. So the buyers of the harvest, that can be cooperatives, traders, processors, will act as withholding agents of that technological fee and will transfer it to a specific account created for this fund. The important aspect here is that the small farmers that can prove that they bought certified seed, either in that season or in previous seasons, will receive back that amount. So you still protect small farmers that are important actors in social and territorial development in Argentina, while medium and large farmers, they have to prove that they bought certified seeds that same season. And if they are reutilizing seeds, they will have to pay for that reutilization. So it's what in the Argentine law is called uso propio, if it's free or if it pays royalties, if it's oneroso. So that is how the fund should be financed, and the distribution will be separated in 3 tranches. The first one will go to compensate seed companies that register that seed variety. The second one will go to return to agricultural producers that certified, that prove that they have certified seed. So in this way, you reduce or can almost eliminate the illegal seed market. And probably the most important aspect of this is the third tranche of the fund that will have to be administered by, similar to what Juliana said, no, we need an interministerial body because the Ministry of Production, the Ministry of Science, the Ministry of Agriculture and Environment are important actors, and we need a space of articulation of all the agendas of these ministries. So it can be administered by an interministerial body that it should incorporate also private actors, because as we showed with the case of Gonzalez, public-private articulation is a fundamental aspect of this. And this fund will be used to promote local firms and public research institutions, especially developing seeds with value for local challenges, for sustainability challenges, So this is the proposal. I can talk later about the governance of the fund, how it should be structured, and who should participate, and what are the decision-making processes that we should take into account.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Start the conversation with some questions and some general comments, and then, you know, take from the audience. So one of the things that I think I told both of you that seems to be a state policy in a country where there are very few state policies, there's a lot of volatility. But in this, I think a change in government doesn't matter, that the Argentine state chooses not to enforce existing laws, either on the percentage of Argentine components in trade with China or in Chinese investment, or in your case, Juan, on the use of seeds that you need to be paying for, but you don't. And the reason why the Argentine state chooses not to enforce this law is fiscal, right? The Argentine state taxes agricultural production, that's the main export, and so they want the producers to have lower costs, or more can be taxed off them. And in regards to China, they want energy. China is putting financing, and Argentina doesn't have a lot of financial options. And so again, there's, and I think what's interesting is this was the policy of this administration, of the prior administration. There's a lot of continuity. I mean, renewables, it's a novelty, but these two are kind of state policies. And so I was trying to figure out what alternatives, you propose alternatives, but do they work in other countries? For instance, you propose, you know, what you propose is you are similar to Brazil's, you know, what Brazil does in biotechnology. But in Brazil, at least, you know, if you read like the work of Carlos Freitas or other, the Brazilian agricultural sector is also much stronger than the its Argentine peers to impose stuff on the state. So for instance, laws regarding deforestation, they have much more power. Whereas in Argentina, that actor doesn't have the power to make sure that once you tax them, the money will go to the fund you suggest rather than to other things. Because once you give money to the state, there is a risk that they misuse it or use it for a different goal. Like for instance, your T2 was return part of the money to the producers. The producers will tell you, well, tax me less. What is my sense of paying a tax so that you would return part to me? Just reduce the rate of taxation. I mean, it's inefficient to just make this transaction cost. And with regard to China, is, you know, you suggest that there should be more transfer of technology than, you know, what's written and not respected already on the law. Is that happening in any other Latin American country? Is there any place that we can use as an example on how to deal with China on these issues? I guess those are my 2 comments. I don't know if you want to briefly address this and then we open.
Yes, in the case of Latin America, Brazil has like a really different approach to China. They have like been able to establish specifically in terms of renewables, research and development cooperation. So we have research and development cooperation in terms of Conicet, our National Scientific Council, but we don't have like especially or a plan like in terms of renewables to guarantee that this transfer of technology is going to be guaranteed. That's why when I said like Argentina needs like in terms of its bilateral relation with China, but more broadly, it needs like a plan in terms of energy that is transversal, both in technical terms and also in institutional terms. In institutional, we need like to settle an agenda of cooperation that integrates like the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Ministry of Production, the Ministry of Development, and also the chambers, like the private the sector that is essential. But also in terms of technical, we have to like design this plan and try to figure out how to guarantee more transfer of technology. So, I mean, not to compete with China, but to like gain own capacities. and also to guarantee, for example, that China invests and finances more. For example, our bottlenecks in terms of transmission of electricity in Argentina, that is a big problem because we had this Renewable program that amounted a lot of investment and finance from China and also from other actors, but mainly from China. But afterwards, we had these bottlenecks in terms of the transmission of electricity because you have the capacity, but then how do you translate that to energy in houses, right? So this is my answer.
And if, I don't know, if people outside are watching us, there is a Q&A, so if someone writes questions there, I guess Pilar could read them. There are no open questions now because I forgot to say that there is a Q&A for those that this is a hybrid event, so it's our first, so a little learning process here. Juan.
So yeah, no, what you mentioned, Vicky, is an important difference with Brazil, and specifically that Argentina has high export taxes. It is part of the distribution that I was talking before. I didn't include it here, but the interest of the government is to keep export taxes. So a big part of the profitability of the value chain goes to finance the state. So there is another important actor that is the state in this distributed conflict. And of course, many agricultural producers will say, you're already taxing me too much. I cannot pay a technological fee. But in the long term, it's probably more virtuous to finance this kind of strategy. That is not a very different to what other countries did. That is to take high profits in natural resources to finance science and technology. Brazil has a lot of that. So it's probably more stable in the long term to do that than to take export taxes and from export taxes use others. So that is, yeah, a very important aspect you point at. And another difference is the law of seeds in Brazil protects more the seed companies, partly because also Embrapa, that is the Institute of Agricultural Technology in Brazil, has stronger capabilities in development GM seeds. So it was an important actor in making a intellectual property regime that protects more the interests of seed companies. So that is another important difference that Brazil has from Argentina.
Yes.
Hi, so we are big agricultural producers in Argentina, and we struggle a lot with the amount of taxes that we get. I would never trust the government in Argentina, like especially at the state that it is now, to do well, like create innovation with this money that you're suggesting, this fund. I would say that in the long term, it's much more important for the country to have a plan for economic rehabilitation, because like that's what it means, and therefore like basically boost business in Argentina and leave the innovation in the hands of the private sector. You know, I find it. I really doubt that having a private public investment fund is going to work at all. But like, I don't know. It's at least my first impression from the state of the country at the moment. I don't know if anyone. Please.
So I'm just following up. So he argues, and I'm just that in Brazil works. So can you make the comparison of why do you think it works in Brazil and it will not work in Argentina?
Yeah, well, at the moment, I mean, the Brazilian economy and the Argentine economy are very different, right? I think we can't compare. I mean, obviously there's corruption in both countries, but like the economy of Brazil is much bigger, much healthier, etc. I mean, that's basically the case. Maybe Brazil is a bigger country, it has more resources, it has bigger institutions, it has more innovation. But it's difficult for me to trust that the government in Argentina is going to build innovation in a way that like is sustainable.
So I think you raised two important.
You both compare with Brazil, so it's interesting that the size of the economy is very
Yeah.
very different, and so maybe that's not the place to look at.
Yeah.
And certainly macroeconomic stability, although Brazil is not doing that great, is different. And in your particular sector, the agricultural producers have much more power to check on the Brazilian state than the Argentinians.
Yeah, no, there are 2 points that you mentioned. That the first one, I totally agree that this depends a lot on macroeconomic conditions in Argentina, and we know that the unstable macroeconomy in Argentina affects innovation badly. To mention something more specific on the seed sector, the most dynamic seed company in Argentina, Don Mario, took most of its R&D office to Brazil. When you talk with them of why that is the case, partly because of the macro conditions in Argentina, partly because of what I mentioned now about the innovation rates. So it is important to look at the macro conditions, but it's not enough. And if you look what other countries did to promote innovation, it's very difficult to find countries that manage to transform their productive structure through market incentives and in a market or private led strategy. I don't know any country that managed to do that. And if you look at the cases, the important cases like Israel, United States, that developed important biotechnology sectors, they did it with the state leading R&D investments. So it's something that the international comparison shows you that you need to have public-private articulation and public resources because it's a very expensive technology.
But I think, I'm sorry guys, and this is the last thing I'm gonna say, sorry. No, because I think you could look at it in 2 ways, right? You could give them incentives, right? So reduce taxes, reduce like costs for the companies to be able to innovate. And then you can also like tax big companies and try to efficiently not give them like the resources, right? So I don't know like if you have analyzed this other option of creating incentives in Argentina for innovation in other ways that it's not necessarily like giving money to the states so that they can then distribute it.
Yeah, well, a big part of productive policies in Argentina is about giving tax incentives and different form of incentives. They don't work very well usually. And as I showed before, multinational companies have many incentives to invest in Argentina. And they invest in Argentina, but they don't invest their R&D activities in Argentina.
Sorry, why do you think that these incentives doesn't work? What is the motives or the reasons why behind that?
I would put the question the other way around. Why would they work? Sometimes they work like, yeah, you give an extra margin of profitability to that firm, but that the firm will reinvest that in R&D.
You could make that return specific to R&D, so you could reduce the tax if you invest in R&D, or if you invest in R&D, you can deduct it from taxation. Like like here, when you donate, you deduct. So that can be done.
Yeah, and the proposal is not just about it's not state planning and state-led development. You have an important part of the proposal that is to give seed companies a profit margin so that they can invest in R&D.
Well, I was gonna say too, presumably the government already has a lot of these policies in place, but we saw the huge discrepancy between the investment from the multinational corporations in Argentina versus elsewhere. So I would think that if these companies wanted to invest in Argentina and these policies were already in place, as we saw, they would have already been investing in them. But I think there's something other than profit motives that drives why, or something other than tax incentives that drives why companies choose to invest in particular countries. The other countries are probably more profitable, even if you include additional tax incentives.
Yeah, and I guess that goes back to the macro point, right? So, yes.
So when we talk about renewable energy, we're usually talking about long-term goals or about 2030, 2045, 2050. And in Argentina, we see a lot of volatility in terms of the government, and we're possibly seeing a turnaround in the next elections. And the political party that could come has a very different position than what we need economically on the policy they would implement. And like, my question would be, how would this project or proposal not hinge upon the actual political position of the government at the time in a way that when the government changes, everything does not. Good. Yes.
You're so right, because, for example, we have like two examples in terms of planification of renewables in Argentina. We have like the first plan that was GenRen, that is renewable generation, that it focused more in industrial national capabilities, and it was not so like, it had like two legs, and one was like, this leg was really strong, that was to focus in industrial capabilities of Argentinian industry. And then we had just this other program that I mentioned, that was Renewable, that did the other way. They were like, I mean, they were not totally opposite, but one focused in national industry and small enterprises, and the other one focused more in terms of gaining capacities through investment and finance from multinationals. And China will play like a really important role in that framework. So I think that the challenge is to try to compensate that the balance that we have, that not to expulse like multinational presence, because we need finance, we need investment, but also we need to keep on developing our industries. So try to balance that, and I think that maybe this plan trying to this transversal but also technical. I mean, this is like this way, right? So it's what I think it would be like necessary is to think about this in terms of technical assessment. So we need a plan for a long term that, in terms of technical, tries to approach both necessities to try to keep on attracting finance and investment from abroad, but also to keep on focusing in national and technical capacities. And in the other way, like institutional. This is a really challenge because of what you said, the next government is going to maybe change everything again, and maybe we have like a plan that is really different. So I think that Argentina like faces a huge challenge in terms of coalitions, not only political, but also in terms of chambers and other private and mixed actors that are involved to. And I think that like the whole vision has to be energy transition, right? So I hope that answers to your question.
Speaking about that, also in China, a very big emerging industry is the production of electric cars. My
Yeah,
point,
it's related to
but basically that's the lithium part that they want to exploit from Latin America. But from that standpoint, is there any plan at this point from the Chinese government to bring their electric car industry to Argentina, or to start to produce it in there, or is not at that stage?
No,
yet?
yeah, sorry that I didn't make myself clear, but one of the memorandums of understanding that was signed this year at the beginning of the year was with the Jiangkan Lithium. That is a Chinese company. That they don't only want to like produce lithium or extract lithium from Fukui, but they also signed this memorandum of understanding to cooperate in terms of installing
To bring back the factories.
the factory
To get manufactured.
to manufacture electromobility. And in that terms, Argentina, it has just presented a draft of a new law that is related to electromobility. So when I say that this plan has to be transversal, and also to consider not only renewables but also alternative energies, and when I suggest that this transfer of technology has to be guaranteed, I am also like referring to lithium, right? In terms of what you said, like try to be memorandum to comply with what they have just said, not just rhetorically, and try to make this new law that I think is going to be approved, to be like a way to like not to just one other case of term modality case, right?
Yeah, and that's interesting because that could mean a quicker transition from Argentina itself to the use of electric car, reduce CO2 emissions, these kind of things.
And
A bigger economical industry.
what I'm suggesting is not to compete with China. We cannot compete
No,
with
it's
China.
more like an
But just
association.
to offer our capabilities in terms of trying to get transfer of technology to be more competitive in terms of, for example, our neighbor countries, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's very difficult to compete with big industries like NEO or BYD and are like the big ones in there.
Okay, last question.
Oh, yeah, I want to ask about the geopolitics of those things. I know like America has a strong presence in Latin America and they're kind of concerned about Chinese investments in, I mean, around the world. I wonder if that affects anything.
Yeah, we are a territory of BPO since like the trade war started, and it's trade war because it's like more a strategic rivalry between China and the US. The US is like really has expressed like several times at least to Argentina, but to other countries in Latin America. For example, not to keep on like indebting their economies with China, not accepting, for example, 5G technologies. We still have not called for auctions for this infrastructure, but it's something that is going to come, for example, for Brazil, for Argentina, and for many countries in Latin America. So the US is really has expressed like it's worried about like Chinese presence in also in terms of health cooperation. But what I always say is that the US is like being like really critical to this presence, but it's not offering like an alternative, right? So in terms of infrastructure, for example, or health cooperation, the US is absent in the region. So there you have like I can recognize that there are countries that are more like related to the US than China, and this is like. But in general, like the US is not offering like the same that China is offering. So
Yeah, and I think that's a problem across the region.
Yeah.
That, because China is the main trading partner of even like Colombia, Chile, Brazil. I mean, so it's very hard
and they
that the
are,
US asks for something with like not much in the
sorry, and they are offering this, and this is like more like a pragmatic way of offering this, instead of the US that has been like more like a political or ideological position. So yeah.
Okay, so I think we're gonna end in this note. Thank you very much, Juliana.